Hey there, folks. This is your favorite YouTuber back again, and I've got a story for you that you will not believe. Before we start, make sure you hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because you won't want to miss the wild tales I've got lined up. Today's story takes us straight into sunny Los Angeles, where none other than Arnold Schwarzenegger himself ended up in an unbelievable mix-up with the LAPD. The buzz around this incident has been downright crazy, and once you hear all the details, you'll understand why the entire West Side precinct was left completely stunned by the aftermath. So how did this all begin? Well, rumor had it that a major screw-up went down involving a routine patrol in one of the quieter neighborhoods in LA. A couple of officers supposedly got an APB on a suspicious individual who apparently matched the description of someone connected to a local robbery crew. Initially, nobody thought much of it. Cops do random stops all the time. But when a source close to me mentioned that the person in question was Arnold Schwarzenegger, that was enough for me to start digging. At first, I honestly assumed someone was pranking me. I mean, Arnold's face is recognized worldwide, right? How could any officer confuse him with a random suspect? Yet, as I quickly learned, it turns out everything was way more complicated than it seemed. According to what I pieced together, it all started on a late morning near Culver City, just on the western edge of LA. Arnold was out and about on his own, driving his favorite SUV. He apparently loves the freedom of cruising around without an entourage. He'd parked near a local coffee shop to meet an old friend who used to be his fitness buddy from back in the day. The two of them go way back, and Arnold, being the down-to-earth guy he is, likes to keep things casual when he's not in the public spotlight. Meanwhile, the cops in that area were patrolling with an eye out for a tall, well-built middle-aged man rumored to be riding in a dark SUV, someone possibly tied to a string of late-night break-ins. That's obviously vague enough to fit half the muscle-bound men in Los Angeles, but it was the only lead they had. When the officers spotted Arnold wearing dark sunglasses and a baseball cap low on his forehead, they decided he looked suspicious enough to warrant a stop. From a distance, they couldn't see his face clearly, and not everyone is super attentive to Hollywood star sightings. Think about it. You're scanning for someone big and brawny, older, in casual clothes. Arnold is famous, but if you're hyper-focused on potential danger, you might still jump to the worst-case scenario. One officer approached him, asking for ID, and that's where tensions immediately rose. Arnold turned to grab his wallet from inside his SUV, and apparently the officer panicked, assuming he might be reaching for a concealed weapon. That's when things took a turn for the bizarre. Before Arnold realized what was happening, two officers pinned him against the hood of his own SUV and snapped handcuffs on his wrists. Eyewitnesses say he tried to calmly explain who he was, but the cops either didn't listen or didn't believe him. In their eyes, this was just another suspect who matched the APB. And let's be fair here, criminals do lie about who they are. However, you'd think the officers would at least glance more carefully at his face before hauling him away. They chose not to, deciding instead to escort him to the station first. This whole situation sounds insane. How do you not recognize Arnold Schwarzenegger? But that's precisely what makes this story so shocking. We're used to seeing him in massive blockbuster movie posters, in political rallies from his days as governor, or even in fun cameo appearances on TV. The notion of him in cuffs is almost unimaginable. Yet it happened because these officers were so locked onto the official dispatch description, muscular suspect, older male, dark SUV, that they completely overlooked the fact that their detainee was a living legend. Then everything snowballed. Nearby onlookers whipped out their phones, capturing footage. Several people called local news stations, some thinking it was an elaborate stunt. The department's phone line blew up as rumors spread like wildfire across social media. Meanwhile, Arnold, shockingly calm yet clearly frustrated, found himself riding in the back of a patrol car. It still seems surreal, but this was just the opening act. The real chaos erupted once they reached the station, where the stunned reaction of the entire West Side precinct would create a media storm unlike anything they'd experienced before. When I first heard the news, I double-checked with a few contacts in local journalism. They'd heard whispers but weren't sure whether to believe them. Then more details flooded in, like eyewitness accounts describing the moment cops wrestled Arnold to the hood of his vehicle. That's when I knew this was way more than some internet hoax. If you're wondering how on earth it escalated so far, you're not alone. Stay tuned, because it only gets more jaw-dropping from here. Arriving at the station, the officers marched Arnold through a side entrance. hoping to keep the scene under wraps. They likely realized by now they were dealing with a high-profile figure, but they still didn't fully grasp the gravity of cuffing someone as recognizable as Schwarzenegger. According to insiders, they tried to follow standard procedure, leading him past booking, prepping him for a quick identity check. But the moment the desk sergeant spotted Arnold's face, people say it was like watching a man see a ghost. The sergeant's eyes practically bugged out, and a stunned silence engulfed the reception area. Different sources paint slightly varied pictures of the station's immediate reaction. Some claim a rookie officer nearly dropped his coffee in shock, while others insist most of the staff just gaped in silence. Regardless, the consensus is the same. Everyone realized how epic of a mistake had been made. Meanwhile, Arnold stood there calmly, his expression a mix of annoyance and resignation. He'd been saying all along that they had the wrong guy, but apparently nobody believed him until this very moment. Even then, a few officers lingered in denial, suspecting it might be an elaborate prank or impersonation. In the middle of all this confusion, the watch commander arrived, demanding to know what was happening. The patrol officers who brought Arnold in tried to explain that they had a dispatch alert matching his description. The watch commander's face went pale as they elaborated, because none of it made sense. Was the suspect supposed to be driving a black SUV? Sure. Was he older, muscular, and wearing a baseball cap? Also yes. But a quick glance at Arnold's actual face should have cleared up any confusion. And that's where protocols had evidently failed. They jumped straight to a physical takedown without verifying ID or even pausing to think, this might actually be Schwarzenegger. By now, word was spreading beyond the precinct walls. Local tabloids were the first to latch onto the story. Is Arnold Schwarzenegger in cuffs? This triggered a wave of speculation, from claims of police brutality to jokes that maybe this was all part of some hidden camera gag. The station's phone lines burned with calls from bigger outlets like Channel 7 and Channel 9, all clamoring for confirmation. The poor public information officer had no prepared statement and fumbled through a series of "we're still gathering the facts" replies. All the while, Arnold was ushered toward a holding area. Several staff members whispered frantically among themselves, clearly mortified. Some tried to reason that if Arnold had just cooperated right away, maybe the situation wouldn't have escalated. Yet multiple eyewitnesses insisted he was calm and polite, simply reaching for his wallet when the officers grabbed him. It was becoming more obvious by the minute. The real issue here was the department's own slip-up, fueled by a vague APB and perhaps a dash of paranoia. Realizing the fiasco they'd sparked, the officers involved started to panic. One insider told me the younger of the two patrolmen looked as though he might pass out from stress. The watch commander demanded someone run a background check, for crying out loud. Confirm his ID, only to discover, of course, that he was 100% Arnold Schwarzenegger. Apparently, a hush fell over the entire station as the revelation sank in. This wasn't just a minor blunder, it was a major embarrassment that could bring legal trouble and a tidal wave of bad publicity. Trying to salvage the situation, the watch commander assembled a quick panel, a senior officer, a lieutenant from internal affairs, and a legal advisor who happened to be at the station for another matter. Together, they decided to keep things contained until the precinct captain arrived. The idea was to process Arnold swiftly, explain everything, and offer a quiet apology. But containment was impossible at this point. People outside were already filming, tweeting, and speculating. The station was effectively in meltdown mode, whether they liked it or not. Meanwhile, Arnold, still handcuffed, repeated that they should check his car registration and driver's license. One witness overheard him say, "All you had to do was ask, and I'd have shown you everything." Talk about irony. If these officers had just taken a moment to examine his documents or even look closely at his face, they might have saved themselves a world of trouble. But fear, adrenaline, and a poorly worded APB had them blind to the obvious, and now the entire West Side precinct was on the brink of a scandal. That scandal was about to break wide open once news reporters and social media users amplified it, turning a routine patrol stop into headline material across the country. With every passing minute, tension mounted inside the West Side precinct. The hustle and bustle of officers going about their duties turned frantic as they realized the magnitude of their predicament. Phones seemed to ring off the hook. The main lobby was packed with everyone from curious locals to persistent reporters, and the whirring sound of news choppers circling overhead became impossible to ignore. What had started as a low-key patrol stop now threatened to unravel into a full-blown crisis. Inside a cramped conference room, the watch commander huddled with a handful of ranking officers, all of them looking visibly anxious. They needed a plan fast. On the speakerphone, a representative from LAPD's Public Affairs Division demanded immediate clarification. Rumors of Arnold Schwarzenegger being roughhoused by two officers were already lighting up the airwaves. The watch commander tried to justify the initial stop, saying he fit the description. We had no idea it was him. But even to his own ears, that explanation sounded paper-thin. He knew a vague APB wasn't going to excuse an improper use of force on someone of Arnold's stature. Meanwhile, Arnold was placed in a small office, finally freed from the handcuffs. According to a staffer who slipped me the details, Arnold gave a long exhale, rubbed his wrists, and said something to the effect of, "I know you have a tough job, but this is absurd." He was frustrated, understandably, but not aggressive. In fact, multiple observers remarked on how calm he was, considering the circumstances. If he'd lost his temper, it might have made the situation even worse, but his collected demeanor did nothing to ease the station's internal meltdown. Outside, the crowd of reporters swelled. Microphones and cameras were pointed at every uniformed person stepping out of the building, with a barrage of shouted questions. Is it true Arnold was handled with excessive force? What charges are being pressed? Are you aware of the social media outrage? None of the officers seemed prepared to handle that kind of media circus, especially not on the spot. Some retreated inside, while others attempted the classic no-comment tactic. By now, rumors spread that the precinct's captain was racing back from a city council meeting. Word traveled fast that heads might roll once he arrived and witnessed the pandemonium firsthand. Internal chatter among the station's personnel was grim. People whispered about the potential for lawsuits, the tarnishing of the precinct's reputation, and even fear that some careers might be destroyed over this mistake. Though tensions were high, Arnold maintained his composure. He politely asked for his phone call, presumably to let his personal lawyer or maybe a close friend know what was happening. According to one on-duty officer, Arnold even cracked a half-smile at how surreal it was. Imagine the man who once played the Terminator standing there, fresh out of handcuffs, in a local police precinct for a crime he clearly didn't commit. It was the kind of moment that no one present would likely ever forget. Meanwhile, the watch commander and a lieutenant from Internal Affairs scoured the call logs to confirm exactly what dispatch had said about the suspect's description. They discovered the wording was indeed extremely vague. Tall male, older, physically imposing, possibly driving a dark SUV. In a city as large as LA, that fits thousands of people, yet it was the sole reason they jumped Arnold. The more they looked into it, the more they realized how shaky their case was. The suspect in question was rumored to be connected to a string of low-level burglaries, but there was no mention of a direct threat that justified aggressive tactics. While the department scrambled to do damage control, social media erupted. Videos showed Arnold being led inside, hands cuffed behind his back. Some viewers assumed it had to be staged. Others were horrified, condemning the LAPD for overreach. The story picked up traction with mainstream media outlets faster than you could blink. Each newscast had a different angle: celebrity profiling, police incompetence, questionable use of force. The West Side precinct was caught in a perfect storm, and there was no easy way out. In hushed corners of the station, more than one officer was heard muttering that such a blunder could haunt them for years, and that a little more diligence on the scene would have averted this entire meltdown. Still, all of this was just the tip of the iceberg. The precinct captain was on his way, and he was bound to demand answers. The city's public affairs officers were drafting statements. Lawyers were texting the watch commander, warning him to keep details under wraps until they had a clear strategy. Yet the unstoppable force known as public scrutiny had already rolled in like a tidal wave, and the men and women of the West Side precinct found themselves struggling to stay afloat. In the thick of the media frenzy, a new figure arrived at the station: Marjorie Adams, a top-tier attorney representing the city. Tall, poised, and accompanied by an assistant carrying a thick binder of legal documents, she wasted no time requesting a confidential meeting with Arnold and the precinct captain, who had just pulled into the parking lot. The captain, an older gentleman named Richard Flynn, looked like he hadn't slept in days, though in reality he'd only just learned of the fiasco. He greeted Arnold with a somber expression that practically screamed, "We messed up." Marjorie laid out the city's concerns with laser-like precision. If Arnold wanted to go after the department for wrongful arrest or excessive force, it could spark a massive lawsuit. The city had faced big legal battles before, but taking on a figure as famous and influential as Schwarzenegger was a nightmare scenario. Arnold listened intently, arms crossed over his chest, and then quietly explained he was less interested in dragging anyone to court than in seeing the department take responsibility. Those present say he talked about the importance of avoiding these kinds of mistakes in the future, not just for celebrities but for anyone who might be misidentified or profiled. From inside the office, murmured voices could be heard, but the exact conversation remained private. Outside, the station hallways buzzed with tension. Officers who weren't directly involved in the fiasco tried to continue their shifts, answering calls for service, typing up reports, and dealing with the usual daily chaos of Los Angeles policing. Yet the specter of Arnold's arrest loomed over everything. A few officers exchanged worried glances, silently wondering if this could lead to departmental reforms or heads rolling. Meanwhile, the throng of journalists outside grew larger and more restless. Vans from multiple news stations jockeyed for prime parking space. Cameras kept rolling, broadcasting live updates. Anchors speculated on what was happening inside, with some pundits on cable news shows questioning how two officers could have possibly confused the iconic actor with a petty burglar. The story went viral in a matter of hours. Memes began circulating on social media, some showing stills of Arnold from his Terminator days with captions like, "He'll be back," for his lawyer. Sensing the pressure cooker about to explode, Marjorie and Captain Flynn decided a press conference was unavoidable. They wanted to get out in front of the narrative, ideally with Arnold by their side, to show unity and address the public's concerns. It wasn't guaranteed that Arnold would agree, but the situation demanded immediate transparency. Arnold, after all, had the right to remain silent, pursue legal action, or do whatever he pleased at this point. The moment Arnold stepped out of that private meeting, a hush seemed to fall over the station's corridors. He gave a brief nod to some of the officers, who looked both relieved and terrified in equal measure. Captain Flynn motioned for everyone to assemble in a makeshift conference room, really just a repurposed briefing area with a single microphone and a city seal slapped on the podium. The plan was to host a short media Q&A. During a quick backstage huddle, Marjorie coached the captain on what to say, reminding him to stick to the facts, apologize for the mishap, and avoid any statements that could be twisted as admissions of guilt for use of excessive force. Arnold stood by, arms folded, occasionally leaning in to ask a question or offer his own perspective. Outside, the chatter of the press was growing louder as they jostled for position to capture the first official words from the department. When the doors finally opened, the assembled media members swarmed forward like a wave. Cameras flashed, microphones crackled, and you could hear people muttering in astonishment the moment they saw Arnold walk in, not as a defendant, but as a key figure in what was shaping up to be a major statement on police procedure. Captain Flynn began with a formal apology to Arnold and to anyone else concerned by the incident. He explained that the officers acted on flawed intel, never intending to harm or disrespect one of the city's most famous residents. Then Arnold took the mic, calmly recounting how the situation unfolded. He stressed that he understood law enforcement's challenges but emphasized that what happened to him could happen to anyone under a vague description and hasty assumptions. Cameras captured every syllable, every subtle shift in his expression. Though clearly frustrated, he maintained a tone of measured composure. "We can't let fear override common sense," he said at one point. "I respect the work these officers do, but I hope they learn from this experience, because next time, it might be someone without a voice." The press ate it up, firing questions left and right. Was Arnold going to sue? Did he feel he was profiled? How could the LAPD prevent such incidents moving forward? Arnold answered what he could, occasionally deferring to Marjorie when the queries got too legal. The entire press conference lasted barely 15 minutes, but it made national headlines before the hour was up. Inside the West Side precinct, a collective sense of relief and dread washed over the staff. They put their side of the story out there, but that didn't mean they were off the hook. In the days that followed, the West Side precinct scrambled to manage the fallout. A formal internal investigation was swiftly launched, with investigators from the LAPD's Professional Standards Bureau poring over incident reports, body cam footage, and dispatch logs. Their goal was to figure out exactly how a pair of officers ended up misidentifying and detaining Arnold Schwarzenegger, arguably one of the most recognizable people in the world. Inside the station, morale hit rock bottom. Officers complained that the swirling media storm made it nearly impossible to focus on their day-to-day duties. Each time someone walked past the front desk, they'd be greeted by a throng of reporters itching for any scrap of new information. Meanwhile, the two officers at the center of the debacle were placed on administrative leave, pending the outcome of the inquiry. Their colleagues were torn between sympathy, since maybe they truly believed they were following that vague APB, and frustration at the colossal damage their overzealous approach had inflicted on everyone else. Arnold, for his part, didn't retreat into silence. He appeared on a few talk shows, speaking candidly about the ordeal. "Look, I've always supported the men and women in uniform," he told one late-night host. "But we have to recognize mistakes, especially when they can ruin an innocent person's day or life." He clarified that while he was upset, he wanted the conversation to lead to better training and clearer communication in law enforcement. Those comments struck a chord with viewers, many of whom took to social media to voice opinions on police protocols, celebrity privilege, and the intricacies of human error in high-pressure situations. All this spurred the department's top brass into action. The chief of police publicly vowed to review how APBs were issued and how officers were trained to verify a suspect's identity. He also hinted at broader reforms in traffic stops and street-level encounters. Some critics dismissed these promises as mere PR moves, but others saw them as a sign the department was acknowledging its own failings. The union representing rank-and-file cops stressed the importance of not scapegoating the two officers, arguing that the entire system needed an overhaul. Meanwhile, the city's legal department braced for potential lawsuits, not just from Arnold, but from civil rights groups spotlighting the incident as yet another example of police rushing to judgment. Arnold's attorney, Marjorie Adams, confirmed they were exploring options, but Arnold himself suggested he wasn't interested in a drawn-out legal battle unless it became clear the department wouldn't learn from the fiasco. Eventually, the internal investigation's preliminary findings leaked. The arrest had indeed been made on flimsy grounds, with no proper verification of identity, and the use of handcuffs was deemed excessive given the circumstances. Several recommendations were outlined, including improved officer training and better APB protocols. The West Side Precinct, once a quiet spot that rarely made headlines, now became a focal point for discussing what happens when policing goes wrong in an instant. Despite the tension, Arnold continued to display his trademark determination to turn adversity into something constructive. He gave a final press statement outside City Hall, flanked by both Captain Flynn and Marjorie Adams. In it, he reminded everyone that nobody is above making mistakes, but accountability is key. "If this can help fix some problems in our police force, then I'm glad to have played a part, though I wish it happened in a less dramatic way," he quipped, prompting a few muted chuckles from the gathered press. In the end, the West Side Precinct remained standing, albeit with a freshly tarnished reputation. Officers went back to their beats, local residents eventually found new topics to gossip about, and the media whirlwind moved on, such as the short attention span of the 24-hour news cycle. But the scars ran deep, and the memory of Arnold Schwarzenegger being hauled in like some ordinary suspect served as a lingering cautionary tale. Fear, confusion, and rigid adherence to a vague APB had overshadowed common sense. That, folks, is how a routine police check spiraled into a fiasco that rocked the entire station to its core. Arnold made his position clear, and so did the public. So what do we take away from all this? Maybe it's that even the world's biggest action star can find himself in the wrong place at the wrong time, if the system is flawed enough to let it happen. And on that note, thanks for sticking around to the end. Don't forget to hit subscribe and ring the bell if you haven't already. I've got more unbelievable stories coming your way, and trust me, you won't want to miss a single one.